Hello, I'm Dr. Ron Eaglin here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a video on now putting data into WordPress as part of my WordPress series, and we're using the same FLX site. You do need to watch the first two videos on where I created the ranking system to kind of get a feel for what we're doing here. I'm kind of moving forward. All right, now, what we want to do now is insert data into the WordPress system, but we're not using the WordPress tables. We're using custom tables that we created. This is the entry form right here. This is an entry form where I'm simply going to input some information, and then I'm going to hit submit, and it's going to go into the database. It's not anything special, not anything tricky. You've seen it before. Stuff like this is very common. Now, I'm going to bring over here, this is just a little capture of what the table looks like where this is going to go. So as you can see, you've got some fields like amount, created by, creation date, expense, expense ID, just basic stuff that's going to go into the table that's coming in from here. So how does this actually work behind the scenes? Well, to do that, let's first look at the URL up here. Notice you've got this race expense add /72. Now, in the case of the /72, that is the race ID. Okay, that is the ID of the race. They're numeric, and that tells you what race you're adding an expense for. Now, for most people, that's totally unimportant whether it's an expense for a race. But when you're entering information into the database, there's usually something that information is basically going to be linked to. In this case, it's a race. It's an expense associated with it, but it can be anything. Okay, and a good way to handle that is to actually have it built into the URL. So we need to know how we're going to get that information in code out and being able to use it in our insertion process. But to do this, let's look at the page associated with race expense add. So I'm going to drag that over to here, and we're going to look at that actual code right here. Now, everything up above this point is simply background information that is common to all the different pages. So there's the template information so that the page is within the WordPress template. You're not going to write this. This is just you're going to have this by simply copying existing pages and using the existing template information. Now, there is a spot where you're going to add your stuff, and this is where that actually occurs. So what is your stuff going to be composed of? Well, first, I've got this global WPDB. That is the global variable for being able to access the database, and you need to use it in your page if you're going to need to declare it in your page if you're going to use the database itself. In this case, we've also got a location variable that we're setting to the document root. But let's move on to the code that we've got where we're actually going to make some decisions of what we do. First is, you should never actually get to the page that we've got there if you're not logged in. So in this case, we have a helper function, is user logged in. And of course, the if is that if the user is not logged in, or if not is user logged in, that's a function call in to a helper function in that and that's a function we've written. Okay, I don't need to go through all the details of that function. Bottom line is, you're checking this with the function, and if they are not logged in, you are done. You're going to go ahead and say, please log in. However, if you are logged in, we've got more things that we need to do. So if you're logged in, one thing we need to do is we need to get your ID. Okay, your unique racer ID, and again, we have a helper function that gets that. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the helper functions. Just suffice it to say that if you're writing into WordPress, you need to be able to write these user functions. And if you need help with these types of things, I am putting up the videos of how to write some of these different functions. However, a lot of this is covered in previous lectures. Now, here I've actually going to I'm creating an array of, in this case we say partner IDs, but the bottom line is we have another level of checking the IDs. This is a function that is going to return a list, or in this case, an array of all the IDs of all the people that should have access to this screen. Okay? And I'm assigning it to the variable FLX partners IDs. And then the next thing I do is using a beautiful built-in capability of PHP. I'm going to check to see if the ID of the person who's accessing the page is in the list of people who should have access to this page. And if you don't, you're going to not going to be able to go any further. Well, okay, we're ready to move on from there. I'm going to now move this up a little bit so I can catch a little bit more of the information that's in here. So where do we go from there? Well, now we're inside of another else. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the ID of the race. And that ID of the race, and this is going to be the ID of the race that this input expense is going to be associated with. And I'm going to do it through the URL decode, but really what I'm doing is through the query variables. I cover how to do this in the previous lecture on WordPress that shows how I get the variables that are being passed through the URL, okay, which is the word WP query vars, and I'm looking at race ID. This should be relatively self-explanatory. However, it isn't. You have to do one thing to make this work, which is you have to input the fact that you're going to have these variables passed over in the functions.php file, which is a separate file altogether. That's what is covered in a separate lecture. Now, I can use the helper function, get the race name. So get FLX race name from the race ID. Okay, that's just a helper function. What that does is it puts the name of the race on the form so that you can see it. You have the ability to echo it to the form. And now, here comes the actual real work, and you'll find that it's really not that tremendously difficult. So I'm going to move this over a little bit, I'm going to create a form, an HTML form, okay? Really straightforward, okay? The form has got a name, it's got a method. This is like any HTML forms, it's got an action. And an action in an HTML form is where, when you hit that submit button, where is it going to send all that information that you just input? Okay. Well, what I mean by where is it going to send that information, it's to what page am I going to send it so that it can be processed? Okay. And the answer to that question is this location here. Now the action says I take the site URL variable. Okay. That site URL variable is the actual URL of the site, so it's going to have a full URL, http:// name of the site, and it's going to go through this directory structure, WP content, themes, 2014 child, race, expenses, add form.php. Bottom line now is that this piece right here is going to process the information that was input. Okay, now that started the form. Now, you're going to have some different things that are in your form. If you've ever written a form, which you should have written a form before if you're doing this, okay, in this case I've got an input type of hidden, and I'm throwing the race ID in there. And the reason I'm doing that is because I need to pass the race ID over when it posts to that other form, or that other file to process it. One of the pieces of information it needs is race ID. That's easy to do if you have an input type where that is actually in there. So when you do the inputs, type, name, okay, which is important, the name is important, okay, and the values. Hidden allows you to put something in there that the user doesn't see, but it's still going to get passed. Now we are going to start echoing stuff to the screen. We're going to put all this into a table. We echo the table. One of the things that echoes out is the race name. Okay, if I go over to here, you'll see that the race name is actually in there. Okay, and then you've got the input fields, which have two pieces that are important. Their input type text, okay, size, name, type, number, size, name, text area. By the way, text areas allow you to have a bigger area. Okay, go ahead. A little bit of styling. Okay, and it has a name. And at the very end, you've got an input of type submit. Okay, important, type submit, which is essentially a submit button with the name submit expense. And that's it. Now, this doesn't process the information, but it does create the form, and it does send the information to another page to be processed. So let's go there. Here's where we're going to actually process the information. All right, so you've got a few pieces of basic information that you've got. This doesn't do anything fancy as far as output is concerned. What it does do is it goes ahead and does the processing of what was sent to it. All right, so you've got a few includes, and the includes allow you to take something that's in another PHP file and push it into this PHP file for the ability to use it. So if you had functions or something somewhere else, you can actually now do this. You can actually use those functions because they're going to be included in here. The bottom line of the processing, however, is that you're going to take those past variables from the post. You're going to clean them up, and you're going to assign them to a variable. So, for example, the race ID, which was hidden, is going to be included in the post, and you're going to sanitize it. The expense name, the expenses had a name, had a post of expense name. If you go back and look at the form, you'll find, remember, yeah, that was there. Sanitized, put into a variable. Once I get all those into a variable, okay, I can now put them into the database. So let's go to that next step. Okay, we also go ahead and pull the racer ID the same way we did before by using the get FLX racer ID. Now, you want to know where those are? Well, it's going to be in one of those things that up here that I included. So those functions are available to you. Now, all the meat and potatoes of this is this line right here. This is one line of code, $WPD, insert, first argument is the table. Okay, let's go over here and remember FLX race expenses. There's the table. There's the fields. I'll put them side by side so you can see them. Okay, you're going to take the race ID. Well, that's the race ID that you figured out up here that was passed over. The expense, amount, notes, created by, creation date. That's it. Okay, that's going to insert the information into the table. Once you're done inserting the information into the table, you simply redirect. In this case, you're going to redirect back to another page, which was the page you came to this page in the first place from. There's no real magic going on here other than just basic, solid, easy code. So to recap, to build a page where you input information into the database, okay? In this case, we did it in 2 steps in 2 pages. We first checked to see if the person should have access to input the information. We then created a form which gathered the information with the action of the form going to a secondary page, which is going to process the information. In the form that processes the information, we grab the information that was sent over via the post, HTTP post, sanitize it, put it in the variables. We then use the insert method built into PHP to insert this into the database, which is held in the global WPDB variable, insert it, and then we redirect after that is complete to a page, which is a final page that you're sent to after you hit that submit button. You don't come back to the same form. You go to a different form. That's it. Okay. Hope this is very helpful to you in looking at how to build custom WordPress for those people who are generically looking at this. But for the people that are working with me as students and working on projects through this site, this should be tremendously useful to you. Thank you very much and good programming.